He's looking at the gospel according to the life of Jacob. As you may have noticed, we skipped over quite a bit of material. Last week we were in chapter 32, and now we're in chapter 48, all the way at the end of Israel's life. But it's a fitting close to this series for us. As we begin this morning, one thing that I've noticed, if you want to really bring out the cynic in people really quickly, all you have to do is talk about politics. So obviously the State of the Union was last week, followed by the Democratic response. And even if you didn't tune in, maybe that's not what you consider entertaining at all, you don't really care about it, you've probably at least heard people talking about it, whether it was on TV or radio or on your news feed or whatever it might be. And wherever you happen to fall on the political spectrum, I bet you sometimes found yourself kind of instinctively suspicious of what the other side was saying, whether that was President Trump or Senator Sanders. You were suspicious of somebody and what they were saying, even when the two of them happened to be in agreement with each other. It seems like they couldn't ever acknowledge that agreement, and you probably felt the same way. There's this thought in the back of your head that they must be lying, that they can't really agree about this one narrow specific issue. They have to be hiding something. You see, both the leftish and the rightish version of politics, both sides present themselves as we're the only ones that have the answers. We are the only path to blessedness and flourishing, to bring it back to biblical language. And so if you feel strong emotions about that, if your gut, when people have these political discussions, if your gut reaction is to simply react without actually assessing the ideas on their own merits, then that is evidence that you have been sucked into this machine. And both sides can really be too individualistic. They want you to be identifying with them in that kind of way. Sure, people could talk about tribalism and groupthink and echo chambers, but the reason that we invest so much in politics and have these strong reactions is because it gives meaning for me. It really is, when it boils down, still very self-centered and individualistic. In other words, the other guy is attacking me. This is my identity. That's why we take it personally, right? These politicians have never met you. They have really everything that they're saying doesn't affect you directly, maybe indirectly, but we don't perceive it that way, right? It's always, they want to take my job. They want to take my money. They want to do this or that to me. They want to give my stuff to somebody that doesn't deserve it. Politics has become not about what's best for society, but how we define ourselves. How can I get ahead? How can I have meaning? And so we obviously take things personally because it's become personal. And even if you are the kind of person that ignores politics, it's hard to avoid because we all want our identity affirmed. We want people to agree with us. We want people to say, yeah, you are on the right track. You have the right ideas. You know what we should be doing as a society. See, we're presented with these two versions of justice, and there's supposedly no overlap, and you're forced into this false choice. But the thing is, both parties have blind spots, and both of them are presenting a version of justice for you to get on board with and identify with and take personally. Both sides' version of justice is in tension with biblical justice on different points. They may get a few things right according to a biblical worldview, but both of them get a whole lot of things wrong. That same natural suspicion, that sensitivity to being wronged, that defensiveness that we feel in the world of politics whenever anybody raises even the slightest issue and you feel the hairs on the back of your head go up because you're like, oh, I had this again. I don't want to have this argument. That tends to bleed over into our faith life as well. That individualism, that taking everything personally infects every corner of our lives. And we see that in the life of Jacob. Jacob, when we first met him several weeks ago, was a pretty good model of what we might call rugged individualism. He's a profoundly selfish guy, right? His motto would be me against the world, or whoever I can use. Maybe people will be temporarily on my side for convenience, but really it's all about me. Right? We remember that his name literally means the grasper or the deceiver, someone who supplants, someone who usurps, takes what's not his. That's his identity. And we saw how he went through some really hard trials because of that. Well, here at last, when we come to the very end of Jacob's life, this paradox of free grace is on display in the life of Jacob. It has transformed Jacob's core values, Jacob's vision of the world. Here in chapter 48, at the very end of Genesis, Jacob blesses his family on his deathbed, and it has absolutely nothing to do with political power. Surely he could have wielded immense political power, if not at least influence. Remember, his son Joseph has, in between where we were last week and this week, his son Joseph has become second only to Pharaoh. They're living in Egypt, and Joseph is the prime minister. Here's Pharaoh's words from Genesis 41 to Joseph. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Surely, for the old Jacob, this is a gold mine. This is the jackpot. This is the ultimate way to get the things that he wants to have his way. But instead of taking advantage of that position for his favorite son, Jacob points his family at last in a different direction to secure their blessedness, their identity, and their future. It's not through political power. And so as we dig into this last chapter of Jacob's life, we'll see God discussing the state of things and telling his chosen family what will be. We'll see God making promises, proclaiming good news that we can trust in, that no political system can ever deliver on. So we'll see as we look together this morning that God is our Father, that God is our shepherd, and God is our Redeemer. That's where we're going this morning. So first of all, God, the adoptive Father, here in Genesis 48. In the meantime, since chapter 32, there's been a massive famine. There's no food to eat. They have to go down to Egypt, which is the only place in the entire area that has grain, that has food to eat because of Joseph's wise management of everything. And eventually the famine continues, and so Joseph's entire family, including Jacob and his 11 brothers and all of their families, 70 people, move down to the land of Egypt. They're now out of Canaan, living in the land of Goshen, and inexplicably, Joseph is somehow the number 2 guy. Through God's plan, he has saved all of Egypt from family and also, or all of Egypt from famine, rather, and also the lives of his own family who are now living there with him. And now we come to 48. Everyone's just gotten settled, and Jacob is now on his own deathbed. He is frail, and yet overjoyed to be reunited with his favorite son, the one that he thought was dead for 20 years. You remember Joseph's brothers were jealous. They threw him into a pit. They said, let's kill him. No, let's not. They sold him into slavery. And then he's as good as dead. They told Jacob that he was dead, and so as far as Jacob knew, his favorite son, Joseph, has been dead for 20 years, and now he's met him again, not only alive and well, but prospering, flourishing, powerful. And not only Joseph received back from the dead, as it were, his beloved son, but his grandchildren as well. And so he's so overjoyed in these verses that Jacob resolves to adopt both of Joseph's sons as his own, that they will be alongside their uncles, equal in rank. In a sense, these sons are to compensate for the loss of Jacob's first love, Rachel, who has also died at the young age of 50 and been buried along the way, even on this trip down to Egypt. They will be treated as not grandchildren, but sons. And so when our passage began today in verse 8, those first few verses, verse 8 through 12, is actually recounting a formal, official adoption ceremony. It's been previously arranged earlier in the chapter that this is what's going to happen. And the key phrase in that arrangement comes a little bit further down. You see it in verse 6 and also in verse 16, that these two grandchildren will be called by my name. That's the key there. See, Genesis, all the way from chapter 12 on, the vast majority of the book is the story of the origins of Israel as a nation. They've come out of Egypt and they're reading this book divinely told to Moses on the mountain. Moses is writing it down, the history of who they are as a people. This is their identity. They come from this family of Jacob. And really, it is a story of a family. It is exactly that. And being part of this family really, really matters. It's not only a formality, but it is much, much more than mere ceremony. Jacob is here carrying on the duty to bless the next generation, to pass on those covenant blessings, just as his father before him and his father before him. Has been the story of generations, beginning with Abraham and coming down through this family, passing on God's covenant, contracted, committed blessing from one family to the next. They understand that meeting and speaking with the living God, as each of them did, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that was the single most defining moment of who they are, both as individuals and as a family. Meeting with God redefined every single one of them, not just along individualistic lines, but as members of this covenant family. And we see that that's underscored here because the blessings are specifically tied in every single instance. Every time this blessing comes up, it is tied to offspring, after all. It's right there in the words of the blessing. You'll be blessed with many children. You'll become many nations. I will give you a land. Your descendants will be as the sand of the seashore, as the stars in the sky. In your seed, in your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so therefore, these covenant family blessings rightly belong to Ephraim and Manasseh. Not only as they are part of the fulfillment, right? They're part of that promise to have many, many children and descendants, but they are also the object of the promises as well. The promise is for them. Now, of course, we know that God is behind this blessing every single time it is repeated. So therefore, even though the words are coming out of the mouth of, in this case, Jacob, they have the force of prophecy, that they are a promise and that they will absolutely come to pass because of God's mighty power. This time, God does not himself speak directly as he has before, but definitely God is the one who inspires and is behind the scenes of this episode, as he is everywhere in the Bible. God is the only one who can actually orchestrate events so that this blessing really does come to pass. Without God in back of it, giving the force to this blessing, it really is nothing more than the nice wishes of a senile grandfather. It's sweet, but meaningless. And we see that here in verse 9, that the children are called gifts of God. And therefore, out of that arises the desire to share the family blessing with them. It's linked to their heritage. You know, for me, obviously, I'm not Korean American like most of you are, but I come from a long line of Scottish Presbyterians. Maybe you've seen me wearing this pin before. It's the clan crest of the MacNaughton clan in the lowlands of Scotland. It looks like that. You still just pronounce that I hope in God. It's just spelled Scottish, but it sounds the same, right? And that would give you the impression, this is the clan crest, the clan motto, that might give you the impression that all of them were believers. All of them were Christians. All of them were good, Bible-believing Presbyterians. Of course, that's incredibly naive, right? In fact, if you go and read the history of this clan that is part of my family, the MacNaughtons were at one time renowned Jacobites, which is a really fancy way of saying that they were politically confused and that their politics kind of went against their religious interests, that even though they were Presbyterians, they supported a Catholic king and ended up being on the losing side of these English civil wars. The same is true with my family today. Many of my nuclear family were raised in Christian homes. My grandfather was an elder in the church, and yet not all of them are walking in faith. To say that the mere veneer of Christianity counts for real faith is naive and foolish. And it's the same for Jacob's family. We see that even though all of them outwardly are members of this covenant family, obviously there are still Esau's and Ishmael's, unbelievers, salted in, that even though they have the outward benefits of belonging to this family, their heart isn't in it. They aren't converted. They don't belong to God, and therefore the promises are not truly for them. And yet, it still matters to be a part of this family. The outward blessings still are confirmed even to Esau, even to Ishmael. And that is why, as we said in the catechism this morning, the children of church members ought to be baptized. That's why my son will be baptized into this community of faith, this family, in the hope that God will keep his promises and grant to him faith as well in time. It doesn't guarantee that my son will be a believer, but it says that we are going to do everything in our power to raise him, to train him up, to believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And since it depends on God's grace, it doesn't guarantee that all will be saved, but it is an expression of faith in God's generational promises and mercy. Jacob is expressing that faith as he blesses his sons, and we express that faith as we baptize and bless and include in the covenant family our children as well. See, the purpose of a chosen family, rather than just a random string of individuals, is not primarily to separate and isolate, as you might think when you look at the rejected branches, like the branch of Esau gets cut off, the branch of Ishmael gets cut off. Their descendants are not included in this chosen family. But the reason for choosing a family as the vehicle of this blessing is fundamentally to grow and expand God's abundant grace outward and make it ever increase. We see that when you think about the fact that now, technically, since Joseph is being replaced by his two sons, if you actually count we'll see that there are now 13 tribes of Israel, not 12, as you all learned in Sunday school. Now, they're still counted as 12 because Levi doesn't have any territory. They're there to help the priests, so they don't get any land, so they knock them off, and it still becomes 12. But then in the book of Revelation, they go back to counting with Joseph again. So it goes both ways. But the principle here is growth, expansion, including more and more people, grace, God's promises, God's mercy, covering more and more ground, as it were. That Jesus mercifully calls out, or rather mercifully calls strangers by his own name. Yes, it's true that saving grace is not universal. God does not save everyone. It's limited to the community of faith, those who actually do believe. Grace begins with the gift of faith, as we so often sing, "Give me faith." That is, all who receive grace demonstrate that grace by their believing, by their faith, that they actually do walk with God. And that's the theme all throughout the book of Genesis. We read that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In other words, he was so holy that he never died. God simply took him. Abraham, the one that started all of this, Genesis 17, receiving the blessing from God. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless." When we look at this, we say, okay, God is saving a family. He's expanding these kind of outwardly growing concentric circles of grace so that grace covers more and more territory. And yet, at the very same time, not everyone is saved. There are still some people on the outside. We see that God says, it's all me, it's all my initiative, it's all grace, and yet faith is necessary. How do we reconcile those two things? Well, theologians talk about God's two wills, that he has a revealed will and sovereign will. Sovereign will is kind of the behind the scenes. Whatever happens is part of God's plan, and you can't escape it, and there is no plan B, and you can't thwart him, you can't overpower him, and it's all grace. God is going to save those whom he will save. And then at the same time, there's his will as revealed to us, which says to everyone, regardless of who you are, believe, walk before me, be blameless. There's the call, the demand. He says, walk with me. And yet only some actually do. We see that again and again in the New Testament as well. Romans 4, talking about Abraham, to make him the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised outwardly in the flesh, but who also walk in the footsteps of faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. The promise to Abraham and his offspring that he would be heir of the world didn't come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. That's why it depends on faith in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring. Not only the adherent of the law, but also the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. And again, 2 Timothy 2, God's firm foundation stands, bearing this seal: the Lord knows those who are his. God graciously adopts an ever-increasing family and calls them by his own name in order to bless, just as Jacob does in this chapter. God knows all who belong to him. But not only is God the adoptive father in this chapter, but that means that we belong to something great. In other words, to be called by God's name is really, really good for us. It means belonging. God is taking in outsiders. In this chapter, we see grace for Jacob. Jacob receiving what he rightly does not deserve based on how he's lived. He gets to see his grandchildren, and he straight up says, This is more than I deserve. I never expected to see you again. This is so amazing. God has been so gracious to me. But more importantly, we need to ask, Jacob's giving the blessing. He's not receiving the blessing, at least in this chapter. Do Ephraim and Manasseh deserve the blessing that they're getting here? They are, after all, if you remember, half Egyptian. Joseph marries an Egyptian, and not just an ordinary lay Egyptian. Ephraim and Manasseh's grandfather is a pagan priest. The descendants of these two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, though the Bible doesn't say about them themselves, but certainly their descendants, the tribes that come from their lines, don't remain faithful at all. They are the most idolatrous of the tribes. They belong to the northern kingdom, the one that repeats the golden calf sin that they had in the wilderness. Jeroboam takes 10 tribes out of the 12, breaks away, civil war, and starts a new kingdom called Israel in the north. And he says, well, I don't want everybody to go back to Jerusalem. That's in the southern kingdom. They have the temple, so I'm just going to build my own. And he builds altars, 2 of them, with golden calves. And he says, you can all worship here. And that is down through the history of kings, always called again and again the sin of Jeroboam, building these golden calves. It's their downfall, and it's linked to, specifically, Ephraim and Manasseh. 1 Kings, this thing Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, but made priests in the high places again among all the people, and anyone who would, he ordained to be priests of the high places, and this thing became sin to the house of Jeroboam, the house of Ephraim, so as to cut it off and destroy it from the face of the earth. Not looking so good for the descendants of these two who are receiving God's covenant blessings here in this chapter. They are surrounded on all sides by unbelief, and yet they receive the promises here. This means that God's people receive a new father that they didn't ask for. Romans 4, again, but the words, it was counted to him, were not written for his sake alone, but also for ours. It will be counted to us who believe in him who raised from the dead Jesus our Lord. These promises are for us. We have a new identity, not one that further individuates us, where Ephraim's descendants could say, I'm a Ephraimite. I care about other Ephraimites. I speak for the tribe of Ephraim. I leverage my belonging to Ephraim, my Ephraimitism, for personal gain. No, it's not about that at all. It's you're included into a larger family that's so much bigger than just your tribe. It's greater than you. It transcends yourself. It's this new identity of the whole family that came from nothing but was just plucked out of the whole mass of humanity by God's free choice to become a mighty nation, or actually eventually 2 nations. As we mentioned, there's the split there, the northern kingdom of Israel as well as Judah in the south, the beginnings of becoming more than one mighty nation. God accomplishes his plan to redeem those who in and of themselves are utterly unworthy. He accomplishes his plan by grace, in spite of continued brokenness and sin. He has mercy. And he takes the undeserving and calls them by his name to belong to something great. But we see also that God is not only a father in this chapter, but he is a shepherd. This God whom our family has known, Jacob says, the one who has appeared to us, we have a special relationship with him, and that relationship is a relationship of a shepherd to his sheep. That's what it says there in verse 15. Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the son of Ephraim, there in the bottom. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all the days of my life. Remember, Jacob himself is a shepherd as he speaks these words. He knows what he's talking about. He understands that the relationship between a shepherd and sheep means provision and intimacy. A shepherd is someone who walks with you, who lives among you, who leads you. Why? Because you're helpless on your own, utterly lost without the shepherd. Moreover, a shepherd is benevolent. A shepherd is good. A shepherd is also clearly the one in charge, because you as a sheep don't know what's good for you. Can you imagine if the shepherd just let the sheep be free range? They would all be lost in about 5 minutes. It's not your will that matters when you have a shepherd guiding you. The shepherd is the one that determines your greatest good and leads you to it. And Jacob says, that has been true in my life. I don't know what's good for me, but there's a shepherd doing all the hard work and blessing me in spite of myself. We see that highlighted in the fact that Jacob is finally here at last done resisting God and being stubborn like he has been all the way up to this point in his life. Jacob finally acknowledges God's plan, and in giving this blessing, he puts the younger first, according to God's will, not his own. We read that Jacob's eyes are dim, just as Isaac was nearly blind when he passed on the blessing. And perhaps the fact that he can't see so well is related to some of the confusion over his arms. Joseph thinks, well, my dad must just be confused or senile or blind or all of the above. He tries to correct him. He actually interrupts the adoption ceremony. And he says, no, Father, why are you blessing them like this? This is the firstborn. But Jacob says in verse 14, no, this is intentional. I know exactly what I'm doing. He specifically says, I know my son. This is the first example of the cultural importance of the right hand. After all, they are receiving the same blessing, but in placing his right hand on the head of the younger, he makes the younger first. The right hand is the sign of power, the sign of, even though the blessing is the same, he will receive the greater portion, the primary share. And we see that again and again in the Bible. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand shatters the enemy. You have a mighty arm. Strong is your hand. High is your right hand. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Don't read any politics into that whatsoever. He will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. And again, where is Jesus Christ? Seated at the right hand of the Father. That's an important theme, and this is the first time that it comes up in the entire Bible. Same blessing, greater measure to the one that has the right hand. Priority. See, before he gave priority to the younger, in that case himself, rebelliously, through fraud and deception. He stole the blessing from Esau. Now, when he gives priority to the younger, the right hand to Ephraim instead of Manasseh, Jacob does it as an expression of submission and humility. Unexpected reversal is another recurring, repeating theme in Genesis. Isaac and Ishmael, God chooses the younger to show that he's the one in the driver's seat. Jacob and Esau, God chooses the younger. God is the one in the driver's seat. Joseph and his brothers, Joseph is the youngest up till that point. Benjamin is born a little later. And yet all the brothers bow down to Joseph. And now Ephraim and Manasseh. Again, every time. Why does God keep doing this? Why does he keep putting younger siblings above the older, even though that goes completely against the grain of everything that this culture is about? What's going on? What's the big picture? Every detail is perfectly orchestrated to achieve God's end goals by God's overpowering grace. And they're also the absolute best thing for the sheep. Right? Again, the sheep are not the boss. God remembers and God can keep his promises to the letter down through the ages. And we see that God does keep these promises. Ephraim and Manasseh actually do, in history, get massive, massive territory. You can see just how huge this is. This is like half of all Israel. Only Judah can rival them for size. They get so much more than the other tribes. They fulfill symbolically this double portion that was intended for Joseph. And even if you look at censuses taken down through the history, the population of those two tribes explodes while the population of the actual firstborn, Simeon and Reuben, actually decreases as you move on in history. They really are the fullness of nations, as it says in verse 16. Let them grow into a multitude. They certainly do. And we see again Hosea 7. When I would heal Israel, the iniquity of Ephraim is revealed, the evil deeds of Samaria, for they deal falsely. Using Ephraim to refer to the entire nation. One more thing that we need to note here is that the promise is not for the whole earth. This is one instance where I think that your ESV gets it wrong and the HCSB gets it right. The word is the same in Hebrew. It could mean either land or earth, but it takes no faith to want to inherit the earth, right? Everybody wants the whole earth. You want to give me the whole earth? You want to give me everything? Yeah, I want that. To inherit the land requires a lot more faith, and that's exactly what is promised here. May they grow to be numerous, not in the earth, not may they fill, Russia and China and North America and South America and Africa. No, may they fill just the land, just Canaan. May they be a multitude in this tiny little sliver of desert land on the Mediterranean coast. Well, who wants that? Well, if they're thinking rightly, if they have faith, they want that. This is God's assigned portion, whether it's large or small, whether it's easy or great. It's God's boundaries. It requires faith to see the value in that. This is not earthly standards of prosperity. I'm going to give you absolutely everything that you could ever hope for. Canaan is kind of desertish. The people that live there, they don't do artificial irrigation. To have grain, to have farming, to have food for your flocks, to prosper, you are utterly dependent on the rain cycle that you can't control at all. And so when God says, I'm a shepherd, I will give you green pasture, I will give you the land, the reason that that's a good thing, the reason that that's such a big deal is because the land is blessed, not outwardly, not visibly, not obviously, but it's blessed because God is there. Let me share a short video clip with you real quick.
As part of the shepherd lesson, I did want to look at one thing in the wilderness that will maybe surprise you a bit. Believe it or not, this is called wilderness, midbar, but it's also called green pastures. Now, when you take a Westerner here the first time and you look at this, you find people say, well, I don't know that I can go there. Because the Psalm 23, the Lord leads me into green pastures, has been pictured as belly deep alfalfa. Well, you haven't seen any belly deep alfalfa. And from biblical time to today, it's rare to see a flock in the farm country. There isn't a lot of farm country in this culture. And so farmers kept the shepherds out as much as they could. Maybe they would come in a little bit after the harvest to glean what was left, but you don't want sheep where you can farm. This is the land of the shepherd. Right on the hillside across from us, you can see those grazing trails, cut there by sheep maybe as long ago as Abraham's time. There's space so that an animal on one path and an animal on another can reach right to the middle between them. That determines the distance, so you can graze an entire hillside. And the shepherds lead their sheep across that hillside slowly, grazing what's there. Now, you look at it from here and you say, what's there? In fact, I remember my first impression. I woke up one morning, I was sleeping out in the wilderness, and I remember waking up, watching a flock of sheep on a hillside like this, and my feeling was, what are those, rock-eating sheep? I mean, what do they eat? How can you call this green pastures? Well, the answer is, there's a small amount of moisture present here. They get a little bit of rain every year. Not much, but a little. Second, there is humidity in the air, especially in the evening breeze, like right now. You can feel it coming from the west off the Mediterranean. There's moisture in the air. That moisture, combination of the rain and the humidity, condenses or drips along the edge of these rocks here. And if you notice, right around the rocks, almost always next to the rocks, you get little tufts of green. Get one a moment. That's what we refer to as the green pastures. So the shepherd looks for a hillside. That's exactly what she was doing. Look at that flock across from us there. Just stunning. Those two shepherd girls have found a hillside that either was exposed to the wind or had that small amount of rain. And they move that flock across the hillside, and it's one mouthful here, walk a step or two, another mouthful, another mouthful, another mouthful. Now that changes the green pasture image a little bit, besides the picture changing radically. Green pastures are not everything you need for the rest of your life. If you make that belly deep alfalfa, then what God is saying, if you follow me, I'm going to plunk you down and you'll never have to move an inch the rest of your life. Just reach out and grab it. Tell me that your life with God has been like that. Worry, said one rabbi, is dealing with tomorrow's problems on today's pasture. In the desert, you learn the shepherd will get you what you need for right now. 10 minutes from now, you trust the shepherd. Just enough.
The promise is for the land, not the whole earth, but it requires faith. This is the background for Jacob calling God his shepherd. He's led me. He's provided for me all throughout the years. Lots of you are at a stage in your life where people talk a lot about what are God's plans for me, and I really want to see God's plans for my life, and that's a good thing to be thinking about in your youth, and it seems really great and desirable, but probably also at the same time a little bit hazy and unclear. You're thinking, I'm not really sure exactly what God wants for my life. So what is God's wonderful plan for your life, and how do you know if you're actually walking in it? How do you know if you really are being led by the shepherd, as Jacob says? Well, that's clear. God says in his word exactly what his will and plan for us is. This is the will of God, your sanctification, your growth in holiness. Micah 6:8, he's told you what is good. What does the Lord require? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Even the definition of church is that God chose us out of the world. So if you want to be certain that you are living in the plan of God, walk with God. Live as a community of faith. The Bible is saying you are no longer Egyptians. Ephraim and Manasseh, your grandfather was an Egyptian priest. You're no longer Egyptians. You belong to the family of Israel. You belong to me. That is your identity. That's the most important thing in your lives. You still live here in Goshen, but you're no longer citizens. And so if you belong to the church this morning, if you are reckoned a member of spiritual Israel, walking with God and exercising the faith of Abraham, then you are right now dead center of God's plan for your life. People sometimes ask, how can I be serving God? What can I do? I want to do these great things for the Lord. And the answer is quite simply, be faithful where you're at. keep doing what you're doing. Because as this shepherd leads, we are going somewhere great. God's people get a shepherd that they didn't ask for or deserve. It means we have a new leader, a new direction. We're going somewhere great, but also somewhere unique and unexpected. God goes with us and we with him. He will not abandon us to ourselves. The image of the shepherd, we said, implied obedience, following. You're not the boss. It implies that even in Jacob's rebellion and wandering, struggling, fighting back, kicking, and ours as well, that the shepherd still pursues you. Tim Keller uses a similar illustration from a friend of his who actually was a shepherd and then became a pastor later in life. And he tells the story of, a sheep. When people talk about the parable of the lost sheep and going and pursuing, leaving the 99 to get the one and bringing it back on the shoulders. Well, do you know how he's bringing that sheep back? The sheep doesn't want to be caught. The sheep wants to keep running. The way that you bring the sheep back is you have to throw it on the ground, tie its front legs, tie its back legs, throw it over your shoulder, and drag it back, kicking and screaming, because the sheep doesn't know what's good for it. The sheep doesn't know where to find food. The sheep doesn't know when it's being loved and protected. And Jacob says, the shepherd was with me not only in the land, but also when I was out of the land, when I was in exile. The shepherd is still here with me in Egypt. This is profound. It puts all of our rebellion and disobedience in a new perspective. Sinclair Ferguson, preaching from 1 Corinthians, says this: what's Paul's main concern? It's that whenever a Christian engages in a course of action, he does so in union with Christ. You have that new identity. You belong to him. You're called out. You're not a citizen of this world. You belong to Jesus. He is your shepherd. Nothing severs that relationship. Not even sin can annul it. That is the horrific truth. Whenever the Corinthians gave themselves to gross and indecent sin, they were dragging Christ into it. Even as grace motivates Jacob to new discipline, to new obedience, at the same time it means that none of us has to be super Christians. There's no such thing. You don't have to reach some threshold to have Christ's guaranteed, never leaving presence. God's plan is so much bigger and grander and also scarier than we could ever possibly understand, but sometimes we get tunnel vision in our spirituality. That there's nothing outside of this one little window. So that we often focus, when we talk about faith, well, God is only about rescuing souls. It's all about escaping hell, getting to heaven. But God's concerns for his sheep as he leads them are as big and as wide as all of creation. As we saw way back 3 years ago when we studied Ephesians together. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses. That's important. Soul rescue is still a part of it, according to the riches of his grace, which he lavished upon us in all wisdom and insight, making known to us the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ, as a plan for the fullness of time, to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth. In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to his will. Why is God saving people in the first place? That's not the end in and of itself, but it is to unite all things in the entire heaven and earth to Jesus. Noticeably absent from the version of the promises that Ephraim and Manasseh receive this time around is the promise that they will be a part of the line of Christ. That part where it says, all nations will be blessed through you. through your seed. Why? Because that's reserved for Judah. Judah is the one who gets the line of Christ. Why? Because God assigns different portions in his wisdom. Not everyone's spiritual life is exactly the same. The shepherd doesn't lead every single sheep single file, but he tailors their circumstances to their needs and their purpose as he sees it. In other words, he doesn't completely erase and flatten all individuality. Christianity is not about being cookie cutter. He simply gives them proportion. Instead of needing to all jockey for ultimacy, he's a shepherd to mighty saints as well as to weak and lame sheep. And they all walk according to his grander, bigger, universe-encompassing, world-sized plan and purpose. It's the same pasture, it's the same fold, it's the same end destination, but the exact hoof tracks will vary from sheep to sheep. And it takes a lot of faith to really believe that. John Wesley was asked, Mr. Wesley, what would you do if you knew that you were going to die tonight? And he answered the answer of a man who really understands what it means that God is his shepherd, leading him every step of the way. He says, I would do exactly as I had planned. I would ride to Tewksbury for I have an appointment to preach there. After the services, I would go home with Brother and Sister Brown, for they're expecting me. We'd sit around the fire in conversation. We would read scripture and have prayer. At 10 o'clock, I would retire to my room, commend my soul to God, go fast asleep, and wake up in glory. Can you say, what's God's plan for my life? What would I do to be really walking in faith? Well, I would do exactly what I'd planned to do, because that is God's plan for me. Lastly, as we close, we need to see that God is the Redeemer. And I promise this will be brief. The primary, in order of importance, the number one way that God blesses his people is redemption. Forgiveness for all of the evil things that we've done. Psalm 32 tells us, blessed is who? Blessed is the man whose sin is forgiven and covered. But it's also more than that, as we've seen. It's turning evil in and around us for good. See, evil in the Bible encompasses both moral evil, things that we do that are morally wrong, things that are done to us that are morally wrong, and situational or natural evil. In other words, stuff that's just really crappy, the consequences of living in a sin-cursed world, but not directly caused by a moral failure. So hurricanes, Bambi's mom, all of those things would be natural evil. And redemption means that really is evil, and yet it is overruled for God's greater good, for God's plan for all of creation. To redeem in Hebrew means to restore freedom at another's expense after the worst has already happened. The word is taken from people who have gotten into so much debt that they would sell themselves into slavery to repay this crushing, unrepayable debt. That has already happened, and then the Redeemer comes and pays your debt so that you go free. This kind of redemption means that no circumstance, even the depths of evil, even the depths of suffering that Jacob has been through, has been wasted. My shepherd and my angel, my Redeemer, has been with me every step of the way. Now, he didn't prevent the evil in the first place. Jacob still had to go through all of those things, but he redeems his people out of the midst of it. That's true for Jacob when he's suffering for 20 years under Laban, when he's now walking around with his lame hip, with the loss of Joseph for another 20 years. All of that was for the ultimate good of Jacob. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil. Bless these boys. Who is the Redeemer? It's the angel. God's envoy, God's messenger. Now we've seen that before, right? The angel of the Lord. But here in 15 and 16, it's actually even more explicit than that, because Jacob makes God and the angel the same. The God whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked with, the God who's been my shepherd all the days of my life, the angel who has redeemed me. The angel and the God are the same reference in Jacob's words. In other words, the angel who is the Redeemer of God's people is the Son, the second person of the Trinity, and it always has been the mediator. The Redeemer is the one who restores God's people, the slaves, to freedom by paying the great cost. Jesus is our greatest blessing, and He already has blessed you by giving everything for you in His life of humiliation, culminating in His cruel death on the cross. God's people then and now receive a Redeemer that they didn't ask for or deserve, and it means new freedom and protection from the ultimate final harm of evil. It means rescue from the tyranny of our own individualism and self-destructiveness, and that plays out again and again in greater fashion in no lesser evil than the murder of God's own Son, the very angel who redeems Jacob here. That murder becomes the instrument to accomplish God's rescue of the whole world. Brothers and sisters, that is blessing. That is the gospel. That Jesus Christ, the Son of God, very God of very God, the angel of the Lord, would experience the full measure of evil, the ultimate self-sacrifice for the sake of His growing family and for the sake of the Father's plan. Like Jacob, Jesus blesses His family, His church. He led them out as far as Bethany, lifting up His hands, and He blessed them. There's no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing riches on all who call on Him. God's promises are being fulfilled. It just may not look like what you expected. Trust in His perfect wisdom. It may go against your gut instincts. It may buck the culture. It may thwart our training and our natural instincts. After all, grace reminds us that we can't ever earn or deserve or manipulate any good thing from God, and we're all naturally suspicious of what we can't control. But when in your life it feels like rock bottom, know that because God is your Father and your Redeemer and your Shepherd, that He is loving you even then. And strive to see everything through that gospel lens. Will you pray with me? Merciful Father, to even call you Father is an amazing gift of grace. To have our identity bound up not in who we are in ourselves, but in who you declare us to be, having taken us out of the world and made us members of your community, your covenant, your family. You're also our shepherd. Even in the darkest days of our lives, you are always guiding us to exactly what we need in that moment. We don't know what is best for us, but you do, and your plans always are accomplished. Thank you for that amazing